Hi, hello, how are you? Welcome to my first True Crime Tuesday video. This is actually the third time I have filmed this video, okay, so it's been a very tricky one to film and pull together. Please bear with me. I'm so new to this. I'm doing my best, trying my hardest. So, True Crime Tuesday came about because I wasn't originally going to do the true crime thing, despite having worked in the criminal justice system, studied criminology, and, you know, genuinely being really interested in true crime and murder mystery and cold cases. Firstly, I wasn't going to do it because there's already so much out there, and I find it slightly problematic the way there's an awful lot of focus on the perpetrators and the way sometimes these people who commit these crimes are almost romanticised. I mean, not almost romanticised in some cases. In like the Facebook groups about true crime, you'll always get these posts that are like, so if you could like snog, marry or date one serial killer, like who would it be? Like just for fun, snowflakes, no need to respond, like just for fun, no offences. That's so fucking weird. Like, how can you fantasize about people who literally, like, fucking, they're not good people. They're like, there was that woman who had a tattoo done of the bite mark that Ted Bundy left on one of his victims. She literally had the bite mark. So that bite mark, the teeth imprint, was one of the things that helped to convict him. You know, it was one of the first uses of forensic dentistry within prosecution. And some woman had this bite mark tattooed onto her because she's so obsessed with Bundy. And it's like, okay, there is nothing wrong with being obsessed with like criminal psychology, true crime, like cold cases. It's dead normal. From a sociology and social psychology perspective, it's dead normal because we as humans have a fascination with things that are really far outside our scope of personal experience. So it's why like contortionists and really bendy people are always very popular on the likes of Instagram, because most people cannot imagine being able to do stuff like that with their bodies. It's why we love watching the Olympics, isn't it? Because these people do this amazing shit while we're sat there like eating pizza, getting out of breath, working up the stairs. You know, it fascinates people. It's also why sex work's become really popular, to be honest, and sex work and stripper accounts, because most people will never set foot in the stripper dressing room. They'll never set foot, you know, in a brothel as a worker. They're really fascinated with that experience that's outside their scope. It's normal for us as humans to have social curiosity. So when it comes to crime, it's really normal to have that interest and fascination. But when them scales start to tip and it becomes almost hero worship and fascination, it bothers me. It does. I'm very concerned about the normalisation and romanticising of violence against women. We see it in films, we see it in TV, we see it in the media. And I feel like this obsession with serial killers and putting them on a pedestal comes from that. So this video is titled Media Misogyny and Murder. So there's going to be a lot of themes that keep coming back in, the way that what's portrayed in the media impacts the unconscious biases that are held by people who work in the criminal justice system, how the public perceive victims, how crimes are investigated, how law and policy is created. So stay with me. This is all part of a massive spider web that comes together and comes back to this base topic. So why I did decide to do these videos was because I watched the Yorkshire Ripper documentary on Netflix. And if you have seen this documentary, oh my goodness, it's infuriating, right? So infuriating. If you haven't watched it yet, I really recommend it, especially while we're all at home on lockdown and you can't go out, can't have a bevy, can't see your mates, there's no footy, there's no pole classes. What are we doing, guys? There's no pole classes. Sit yourself down and watch this. It's so worth the watch. I really enjoyed this documentary because the focus was on the victims and the spectacular police fuck up that was that investigation, but it also very clearly demonstrated how what's portrayed in the media and the biases and prejudices that we hold can impact things on this large scale, how the microcosm reflects the macrocosm is what we call it in sociology terms. So basically how little things all impact society and culture as a whole. So when you see people who are kicking off about particular memes or particular jokes or TV programs, and you think like, it's only a fucking joke, like calm down, fucking Karen. And yet we call them snowflakes and we say it's pissing on mad and all this other shit. Actually, it's dead important. One phrase you will hear me say loads in these videos is nothing happens in a vacuum, okay? All sorts of things that go on within our society and culture impact really serious issues. They impact how we think, how we behave. That is the whole basis of sociology and social psychology, which in turn, criminology. So I was in the hairdresser having my hair done, and I was talking about this documentary with my stylist, who's an amazing feminist. She's a wonderful, wonderful chick. Sarah's amazing and I love her. And the woman who was in the chair next to me waiting to have her hair done heard, me talking about how the misogyny really enraged me, about the police fuck-ups, about the prejudice against sex workers. And, she joins in the conversation. She was like, oh my goodness, I watched this. It wasn't infuriating. But a comment she made really, it just set something off in my brain. And she said, it's just amazing to see that that's how things were back then in the 70s. Now that triggered all of this, guys, all of it, because it was like that sent the mechanisms working, and my little brain, started to very rustily creak and go tick tock, because there's an idea when we watch these documentaries and you see what goes on and you sit back and go, oh, that's terrible, that's terrible. Thank God, we've learned from this. And it means that we can kind of deflect any ideas of personal responsibility as an individual or as a society by just going, them ignorant people in the past, fucking hell, like them ignorant police officers. Thank goodness that wouldn't happen now. For that to be true, for us to look at atrocities or mistakes in the past and for us to avoid those same mistakes happening again, we have to learn from that experience. Now, in the case of the criminal justice system, government agencies, that's what serious case reviews do, okay? So what a serious case review is when there has been one of these catastrophic fuck-ups in a crime, the way it was prosecuted, the way it was investigated, or in the harm prevention and public protection. So when there could have been strategies and safeguarding put in place that would have prevented this crime from happening, and that failed. Either the agencies failed, our policy failed, there was red tape that prevented this. So some really good examples of serious case reviews that when you do your training within criminal justice as an employee, they highlight for you are the Stephen Lawrence inquiry and the Baby P serious case review. There's a few others as well, but those are the two big ones that get highlighted. But there was no serious case review done after the case of the Yorkshire Ripper. And in my training with the criminal justice system as an employee, and through all the different aspects of learning that I've done around criminal justice, unconscious bias, safeguarding, public protection, I have not come across a single serious case review relating to attitudes towards sex workers, full service sex workers, and how they're treated. Even when it comes to criminal justice policy, the only policy in place is exit strategy, which means that if you are working with a person who is engaged in the sex industry, the policy is to encourage them to exit. I've done a video about this as well, talking about the law and policy around sex work in the UK. I think I'll upload that this Friday. I was going to upload the video I've done talking about OnlyFans this Friday, but I think with the push to introduce the Nordic model into the UK, this one's actually more important. And that really pisses me off, because how are we supposed to to expect better for the future? How can we look back at this case of the Yorkshire Ripper and be like, oh, well, you know, that's just how it was back then. Thank goodness we've learned from that. When actually there's nothing being brought into the criminal justice system that teaches individuals working in those roles about unconscious bias towards sex workers and prejudice against sex workers, that teaches them how to properly respond when the victim you're dealing with is a sex worker. I'm going to put a side note that there is an organisation on Merseyside called the Red Umbrella Project that actually do this. I went to the Liverpool Police Headquarters and sat in one of their educational talks that was teaching police officers in Merseyside about the prejudices that full service sex workers face, and how to have strategies set up to best support victims of crime that are sex workers. And it's Liverpool have chosen to do this, Merseyside, and it's absolutely phenomenal and amazing. Again, I think I'll do a video talking about them and some of the major cases they've been involved with and help to get a really good prosecution and sentencing for. But speaking from the national legislative perspective, not in there. So thinking about all these different aspects, you know, thinking about the way that documentary was done with a focus on the victims. Again, if you haven't watched this, go watch it. It's so good, infuriating, but so good. I like the fact they put a perspective on the victims. Literally in that documentary, it's just towards the end, it's like, and then they arrested Peter Sutcliffe and, you know, he got tried and went to prison. They talked about the awful things he did. They talked about the victims, don't get me wrong, they talked about the crimes, but there wasn't this focus on making him the star of the show. I really do have problems with this, making these perpetrators the star of the show. I think especially as someone who's worked with people who've committed murder and done really heinous things, you realise that they're not that extraordinary. Using that phrase, nothing happens in a vacuum, it's far more important to examine and understand common criminogenic factors and how those play a role in recidivism, the likelihoods of committing crimes and recommitting crimes. You know, we look at things like socioeconomic factors, family history, has that person been in care, their level of education, all sorts of things like that. It's, you know, it's not generally looking into the brains and thoughts of these really fascinating people. A lot of them are just very ordinary people who've just done a terrible thing, either from a particular circumstance or because they're just a little bit fucked up. So yeah, I decided to come ahead with this True Crime Tuesday to produce videos examining true crimes and looking at the socio-economic circumstances of the time, like the Ripper documentary did, looking at the victims, sometimes humanising and giving the victims names, where their names have, you know, they're in the media, but nobody knows them. You can name me now 5 serial killers, you can name me the perpetrators, can you name all their victims? And I know that this is a bit of a contentious subject because people say that the victims should be remembered as more than just being a victim of that person, and I absolutely agree. So let's talk about those victims as people. That was the mistake that was made in the investigation of the Yorkshire Ripper, that the police had invested themselves in this narrative that the perpetrator was committing these crimes because it was a vendetta against sex workers, that he hated full service sex workers, that those were the women that were at risk. It actually turned out at the end of the documentary that they didn't even think that the first victim was actually a sex worker. There was no evidence at all that she was a sex worker. A journalist got hold of the police reports from the FBI through the American Freedom of Information Act. And when she looked at these findings, the assumptions that had been made by the police to fit this narrative that they had created were absolutely disgusting. The first victim that was found in 1973, they had put everywhere in the papers that she was a sex worker. They told her kids that she was a sex worker. She'd never been arrested for soliciting. There was no evidence she was. But in the police report, they were writing her things about her character, that she left the kids at home, that she went out drinking and she hung around with men. But they made her these assumptions about her, and it impacted the way that they investigated this case. They also disregarded statements made by a woman who was potentially Sutcliffe's first victim, because she wasn't a sex worker and she didn't die. So they were like, no, well, you don't fit our pattern. They'd created the pattern and then told this woman she didn't fit it. This woman had a description of Sutcliffe. If they had been able to step away from their prejudices and their assumptions and actually investigate this case properly, so many of those women's lives would have been saved. Like, unconscious bias and prejudice against sex workers kills women. I mean, the fact that there was never a major serious case review done, the fact that this case isn't used in criminal justice training as an example of how not to behave towards crimes against sex workers, I just don't get it. It makes me really angry. It really pisses me off. It wasn't until 1975 when the first victim, it was the fifth victim of the Ripper, but the first victim that definitely was not a sex worker, it's when her body was discovered, that this crime really started being taken seriously, that the media actually started reporting it in a way that was meaningful, that made the front pages of the newspaper. So Jane McDonald was the fifth victim of the Yorkshire Ripper, and she was a 16-year-old girl. And straight away, the media were reporting that this was the first truly innocent victim. I mean, fucking hell, man, that line, when I heard that in this documentary, I was literally like, truly innocent victim? So we're gatekeeping victimhood by way of modesty, chastity, youth, innocence. And the police were still so invested in their narrative that this guy has a one-man mission vendetta against sex workers that they wrote to Sutcliffe in the paper. They didn't know it was Sutcliffe at the time, obviously. It was just the perpetrator. Like, they wrote a letter to him in the newspaper and published it, like, appealing to his sense of morality and guilt, saying, how do you feel? How do you live with yourself? You made a mistake and you accidentally killed a truly innocent victim. How do you feel now? How's that weighing on your conscience? So they were okay. They were almost like reassuring him, like, oh, we get why you didn't feel guilty about killing fucking hers. You didn't feel guilty about that killing them sex workers because they're just like dirty women of disrepute, but you killed an innocent victim, so now this must weigh on your conscience. I did a little bit of research, and in 2011, the independent newspaper published an article which said that there was 24 unsolved violent murders of full-service sex workers that had gone unsolved in the 2 decades preceding 2011. 2 dozen violent murders of sex workers. Those perpetrators are working free. Have you seen any documentaries talking about this? Have you seen this in the media? Have you seen this being brought up time and time again, that we're doing a renewed effort to find the perpetrator of this awful act against this sex worker? Because I've never seen those. Never heard of this. But Madeleine McCann's disappearance, my goodness, we're still hearing about that, right? All the time, that's being brought up on his front page of the newspapers every few months. We're still looking for Madeleine. But then when you see, again, I've done a video talking about the online hatred towards OnlyFans. When you see the way people online talk about sex workers, and not even full service sex workers, you know, Because we know there is a hierarchy. We know that the way people consider people who do OnlyFans is completely different to the way they consider full service sex workers. Like if you do one, you might be acceptable. And it's the defence given, well, at least you're not a prostitute. And if the attitude towards people who are only doing OnlyFans, only, you know what I mean by that. Only doing OnlyFans is so full of hate and that's what you deserve, that's what you get. How the fuck do we expect anyone to care about crimes against street sex workers, and especially street sex workers that are substance misusers, that are potentially considered a bit of a public nuisance? Like, how do we expect anyone to care when this is what's being propagated? And drawing those comparisons, that's why people didn't care about the Yorkshire Ripper case, about Sutcliffe going around and murdering women until it was a truly innocent victim. Now, I'm going to go off on a couple of tangents here, so bear with me. The first one is this idea of truly innocent victim, because it's hard enough for women to get prosecutions against their assailants when they are not sex workers. So let's talk about this. 2016. It's that name. You know what I'm going to say. Brock Turner. Absolute fucking horrible bastard. Brock Turner violently sexually assaulted a woman behind a dumpster at a frat party. He assaulted her so badly that there was trigger warning here if you want to skip this bit. She had like debris from the ground inside her vagina. That's how violently this man sexually assaulted her. He was pulled off her by witnesses. I believe it was 2 international students who were riding their bikes. Brock only got given a 6-month sentence. Judge Aaron Persky felt that Brock's future was too important to be impeded by a prosecution. There were phrases used along the lines of for a night of fun or for a single mistake. The media published Brock's swim results. They were publishing about how he was a Stanford swimmer, about how, he was from a respectable family. They were publishing his fucking CV, basically. So it's going in a loop, and you can see where all these things are offshooting and linking together. When you've got the media who are more interested in publishing the achievements of a perpetrator or accused perpetrator of a violent sexual act, when you've got a judge who's given them lenient sentences and is concerned about the impact on their future. Brock's dad wrote a letter that was published in the media after Brock went to serve his measly 3 months in prison about how Brock was so sad that he couldn't eat steak. You're talking about these victims who are impacted and scarred for the rest of their lives, and we're supposed to care about some privileged white boy sitting in prison because he can't fucking eat steak. And this was a victim who was a university student. We're not talking a street sex worker. We're talking about a university student. And look at the struggle she had to get justice. And again, there was this, she was drunk, she was drinking, she agreed to go outside with him. Apparently she was dancing sexily with him or another guy. So, did you consent? Did you consent? Are you sure? Are you sure? In 2017, in Ireland, senior councilwoman Elizabeth O'Connell held up a 17-year-old rape victim's underwear in court. She used this 17-year-old victim's underwear as a form of defence in her representation of the accused, stating, "You have to look at what she was wearing. She was wearing a lace front thong." So a woman in our courts is using what someone's wearing as a way to try and gatekeep her victimhood, as a way to try and prove that she must have been asking for it, that she must have consented, because if she was really a victim, why would she be wearing sexy underwear? So victim blaming really pisses me off more than anything else in the world. We do not apply this same narrative and these same ideas about victim blaming to any other crimes. All of those statements that I've repeated that were brought up in courts of law that affected cases 2016, 17, 18, they all amount to the same bullshit narratives. What were you wearing? Why were you drunk? You were drunk. What did you expect was going to happen? Why did you put yourself in that situation? Why did you go to his house? If you go to someone's house like that on your own that you don't know very well, what are you expecting to happen? Why weren't you with your friends? Why didn't you stay with your friends? Why did you get a taxi by yourself? I think you've got to take some personal responsibility for what's happened to you. You knew you could be at risk. You knew there could be a bad man out there. You knew there could be a person who wanted to do harm to you. Why didn't you do more to prevent yourself potentially being a victim? Right, I know I am at risk every single time I get into my car and I drive down the motorway at 70 miles an hour, okay? When you look at the statistics for car accidents, they're really high, especially the more you increase speed and the more miles that you do, okay? So every time I'm getting in my car and I'm driving on the motorway, there could also be a bad man. There could be someone who's driving without a licence, or who's been drinking, has stolen a car, and I know that's at risk every single time. So if I had an accident, if some drunk driver, if someone who'd stolen a car, if someone who didn't have a licence crashed into me while I was driving down the motorway and killed me dead, gone. Do you think there'd be any comments on social media underneath the news articles that were peddling the same bullshit victim blaming narratives? Can you imagine people commenting like, well, she knew the risks on the road. I think really she's got to take some responsibility for putting herself in that position of risk. Why was she driving? Why wasn't she taking the train that's like more environmentally friendly anyway? Like, if you wanna use fossil fuels and petrol and drive, maybe you deserve this to happen for killing the earth. Why were you driving such a fancy car? Like, if you're going to drive around in a fancy car, what do you expect? People are going to try and hit you and crash your car off the road because that's what you're asking for. Why didn't you have a car that had better safety features? If she'd had a car with better safety features, then maybe she'd still be alive. I think she's got to take some responsibility for this herself because she knew the risks of the road and she drove anyway. Like at Christmas when the drink driving adverts come on and the message is loud and clear that if you drink and drive, if you choose to ignore the law, that you will be punished to the highest extent of the law, that's your personal responsibility. No one's got no sympathy for you. If you do that, you're going to be prosecuted. So why is it that when there's someone committing acts of sexual assault in a particular area, there's campaigns being brought out to educate about sexual assault, about rape, it's always aimed at the women. It's always what women can do to prevent being the victims. It's always lock your doors, stay in groups, don't go down dark alleys. Even to go so far as recommending self-defense and carrying self-defense items on your person. In America, the narrative is always, this is why I carry a gun, and it's like, fucking hell. Unless you have been trained to deal with firearms in a high-stress situation like the police are and like the military are, the likelihood is that gun will be turned around and used on you. Like, that's our strategy for preventing this. Carry a gun, carry a weapon. Don't go out by yourself. In the Yorkshire Ripper documentary, the women were so angry because as these offences were going on, the police set a curfew for the women. So the women were watching all the fellas, and it was a man committing this act, And the women, the students who in the time of feminism in the 70s had just got their freedom, they were just starting to taste independence, they were told to not go out unless they were in the company of a man. How fucking backwards. They were given a curfew. It was women couldn't be out by themselves after dark unless they were chaperoned by a man. And then the fellas who were not being impacted in any way were interviewed, and they were like, these women know that there's a killer on the loose, and look at them going out and enjoying themselves like they're so stupid. Don't they know the risk if anything happens to them? Like, they're just asking for it. So women were told to stop fucking existing because of the actions of a man. And then all the fellas are sat back fucking judging them, like, not having their freedom impinged on in any way. And the same is true now. We're seeing these adverts, like, giving all these advice over how women can prevent themselves being a victim. For one, I always feel like the undertone of all those campaigns is make sure someone else is the victim, not you. But I have never once seen one of these media campaigns that's like, men, don't fucking rape, okay? Okay? Don't sexually assault people. I know it's hard, guys, but don't do it. If you do, we will prosecute you to the highest extent of our powers to do so. We'll prosecute you to the highest extent of the law. Anyone ever seen a TV advert saying that on the radio? Posters, newspapers, online, anyone ever seen that? Until I see them advert, don't tell me that things have changed and improved since the 1970s. So we can see how all of this is linked, inextricably intertwined, okay? What's being put forward in the media, these ideas, they're reflected by society at large, on the likes of social media. Those ideas infiltrate how we think as a culture, as a society. The ideas we put forward, individuals absorb all those ideas, those models through an osmosis, and then they go and work their jobs in criminal justice and in the courts and in the prisons and in the police. So then the professionals who are dealing with the victims of these crimes, with the perpetrators of these crimes, are carrying all these unconscious biases from that cultural osmosis, and they impact how they then do their jobs. It impacts how law and policy is created. It impacts everything from the highest level, from our fundamental legislation right to the police officer that's supposed to hold the victim's hands and offer them a cup of tea. Victim blaming. But there's another problem when it comes to the professionals, isn't it? Beyond just what they've observed from the media, it's the underrepresentation of the factions being affected by these crimes within those organisations and institutions. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a fun feminist history lesson now. Are you ready? 1869. 9 women sat down and took the exams for the University of London for the first time. This is really important because law, policy, criminal psychology, all those ideas are underpinned by research from experts. So if you don't have representation in academia, you don't get representation in law, in policy, in talks about recidivism, in how to prevent crime, in harm reduction. Because this might come as a shock to people, but it's statistically noted that men don't seem to care quite as much about issues that majoritively or exclusively impact women as they do about the issues that affect them personally. Shocking. I am stunned by this information. In 1915, the first police woman, the first female police officer, was given her warrant, and her name was Edith Smith. 1915, the first time we've got a woman representing women in policing. In 1920, we saw lots of changes within law, within the legal system and criminal justice. So we had our first court official in the Irish courts, that was Georgina Frost. Also in Bristol in 1920, the first female jurors were sworn in. So the first time there's been female representation on the jury of any crime case. 1920 Ursula the first female solicitor. And the UK's first female solicitor was named Madge Easton Anderson. So if 1920 in Law is the first time that women are getting any seat at the table, the first pioneers, trailblazers, women being represented in those fields, we know that when you first get access, when you first get a seat at the table, that doesn't mean that the problem's solved and there's equality. We know that that means you've got a long way to go before women are actually then reaching the top of the ladder, the higher rungs of power and authority. So how long do you think it took to go from having our first female solicitor to having our first female judge? I'm going to tell you, 30 years. 30 years. 32 years to be precise. So after our first female solicitor, Madge Easton Anderson, was sworn in 1920, we then had our first county court judge in 1962. And that was Elizabeth Lane. And Elizabeth actually also became the first High Court judge in 1965. So looking at these dates, 1965, first High Court judge, there's a woman. That's only 8 years before the first Ripper victim. And the Ripper documentary also talked from the perspective of a journalist, a female journalist, about how in that time era, women weren't allowed to cover important crime cases, okay? They weren't allowed in newspapers and media to report on those cases. They were given the fluffy stuff like the kittens lost up trees and the church feats and, you know, all the fluffy bollocks because they're women with their delicate sensibilities and it needed a man to cover the important cases. So is it any wonder that policing and the criminal justice system and the courts were riddled with misogyny and are still riddled with misogyny? Because even though there's representation in those years, we've had a seat at the table for less than 100 years. 100 years takes a long time for equal representation to happen. And unfortunately, because for so many centuries before those fields were male dominated, like with politics, you find that a lot of women, when they enter those fields, they internalise a lot of the same ideas as men. Because they feel like if they're going to be taken seriously in that field, they've got to act like men and think like men and behave like men. Margaret Thatcher was a great example of this. Don't ask me my opinions about Margaret Thatcher because I'll upset some people. But she is quoted that she didn't even consider herself a woman. So she obviously felt like to be able to be Prime Minister, she had to embody the essence of a man, of masculinity, to be strong, to be powerful, to be treated with respect. And you do hear of this happening a lot, that internalised misogyny, it's a fucker. A lot of women who want to be taken seriously in male-dominated fields will sell out their own gender. They will become indoctrinated into these ideas. Elizabeth O'Connell, the Defence Senior Counsel, holding up a rape victim's underwear. How can you do that as a woman? But it means that token representation isn't enough. It means that we have deep-seated structural problems that we have to overcome before misogyny and unequal treatment within the criminal justice system is going to really be eradicated. Now, talking about media, talking about politics, talking about the underrepresentation of women, I'm going to give you a case, okay, that is a perfect example of everything that I've been talking about. And also give spotlight to an amazing woman, so we're not giving any more attention to shitty men, although we are going to talk about one very shitty man because it's really relevant to the points that I've been making today, okay? So, 2017, it's the British Summertime Festival, and a lady called Gina Martin is waiting to see the Killers play. You know what it's like at festivals, right? You have to get to the stages early, don't you, to wait for the band so you can get a good spot and be able to see everything. So you're having a drink, aren't you, with your mates and you know, chatting and having a little dance and all the rest of it. While Gina's waiting, some guy works up behind her, sticks his mobile phone up her skirt and takes a picture of her gusset, of her crotch and her genitals. So as victims are told to do, She reported it because that's what you're told, aren't you? Why didn't you report it? Why wouldn't you report it? So Gina does what victims are told to do. True victims, truly innocent victims. And she reports this. The police then come back to Gina and they tell her that they are closing the case because no crime has been committed. So as society is made and remade, particularly with the advent of the internet and mobile phones, society has been made and remade at really quite a fast rate. And we have to have law and policy that is being reviewed and renewed at an equally fast rate. Because as society evolves, criminals evolve, crime evolves, and you need to make sure that you are on the ball with that, right? So that's why we're talking about academia. We have all these experts, we have all these people who are paid to have the knowledge and expertise to create law and policy as the world evolves, to make sure that there is public protection, the victims are protected, that justice can be served. But nobody had thought to make upskirting a crime. Now, this has something to do, I remember reading, I need to re-research this, I should have done really before doing this video. It had something to do with the fact that journalists have been doing this for years, that they used to lie in wait, like when women went to the races in Aintree, they'd lie on the floor or like have the cameras on the floor to get them shots when the wind blew, to humiliate the girls. But particularly they've done it to celebrities for years. Do you remember me saying about nothing happening in a vacuum? If we're buying media where women are being humiliated and photographers like predators are lying in wait to take photographs of their skirt, get a little shot of their knickers to degrade them and devalue them, it's reminding them female celebrities that they might have the money, that they might be successful, but that they're just still hers, they're still sluts, that men will still degrade you and use your sex to put you in your place and shame you. And then consumers will buy this. It's the same trend as when fellas sit and judge sex workers or glamour models or actresses or like beauty pageant contestants, and they pick them apart. She's too fat, her nose is too big. That woman had never looked twice at you in the street, Brian. What the fuck are you on about? Brian hasn't been in the gym in 6 years and he hasn't had a haircut in 3. Brian still relies on his mum to cut his fucking toenails. But he's sitting there judging some of the most beautiful women in the world because it makes him feel better, because he can still use his power of masculinity to put them women in their fucking place. So this idea of upskirting, people profit off this. Newspapers, particularly newspapers and media, have a lot of power, man. I'm here like fucking brushes everywhere as I get angrier. So one of the reasons why upskirting had not been brought into law was because it would have prevented these tabloid newspapers, these journalists, from taking them pictures. It would fall under the same law. Power, money, wealth, influence, yeah. Shocked, stunned. So when Gina's told no crime's been committed here, sorry, closing your case, Gina was like, nah. So she put this on social media. She was fuming, quite rightly fuming. She put this on social media. It gained loads of attention. Celebrities backed it, MPs backed it, and it got brought. There was a petition. It got brought forward to Parliament to be heard in the House of Commons. I'm not a political expert, so if I'm saying anything wrong or too simplistic here, please someone feel free to correct me. I'm not precious about it. But from what I understand, when a petition gets enough signatures, it gets heard in the House, in Parliament. And then as long as no one objects, if everyone agrees, the motion then gets put forward to the House of Lords, and that's where they can vote on whether something's going to actually be brought into law or not. But all it takes is for one MP to reject it, and it has to go back again and wait to be debated on as to whether it's going forward to the House of Lords. So when the upskirting bill, the proposition to have this made a criminal offence came into Parliament, there was one MP that objected to it, which got the fight for upskirting to be criminalised pushed back. It did get criminalised, it did get brought into law in 2018, and that was thanks to Gina. Is that right? January 2019, sorry, it got made a criminal offence. Yeah, 2017, the upskirting incident happened with Gina. 18 months later, January 2019, it finally did get written into law. That is now a criminal offence, thanks to this amazing woman, to Gina Martin, who wouldn't take no for an answer. She didn't just accept what the police were saying. She were like, fuck you, I ain't accepting this. This is a crime. And she fought for it. Gina was not a criminal law expert. She didn't have wealthy daddy, you know, none of that nonsense. She literally was a normal person who knew nothing about law. And Gina's quoted as saying that she really hopes that this is inspiration for other women and other people, marginalised communities especially, that, you know what, the criminal justice system doesn't always have our best interests at heart. It hasn't always considered our needs, that sometimes we have to have the bravery to fight for things for ourselves, especially being excluded from law and the criminal justice system for so many years. We've only been allowed a little seat at the table for 100 years. It's made to seem very intimidating, and that stops us from going forward and pushing and using our voices, fighting for our rights. Gina says that she wants people to know that you have that power, that if she can do it, anyone can. And that's a message I want to put across through loads of these videos. I'm going to show loads of examples of people having to fight for public protection, for law, for policy that should have been there in the first place. So highlight there to Gina Martin, amazing woman, inspiration. Thank you, Gina. But let's talk about that MP, okay, that objected. That MP's name is Christopher Chope. And Christopher Chope and his little mate, he's got a little pal with him in Parliament, right, who's the Shipley MP, Philip Davies. They have a track record of voting against motions, interestingly, almost exclusively pertaining to women, but motions that are from a private motions put forward in Parliament. They have a track record of some very dodgy voting practices. In 2019, I can't do this while talking. In 2019, Mr. Chope objected to a motion to review the law around female genital mutilation, about a crime that's against the Human Rights Act. Like, he actively stood up and objected to this. And yeah, he also stood up and he objected when the initial bill, the motion came through to have upskirting made a criminal offence. He's there, you know, sitting there, here's this, yeah, you know, upskirting, have it made a criminal offence to whap your camera, mobile phone up women's skirts. Whoever is wearing a skirt, anyone can wear a skirt, no judgment here. Gender's a social construct, live your best fucking life. And he stands up and he's like, object. What is it they say, like, in Parliament? They make them stupid fucking noises like farmyard animals, don't they? Nay! Like that, what the fuck? What the fuck? So I've got a quote here, right, from Mr. Chope, Mr. Davies, these little pals sitting in Parliament. They dislike politically correct nanny state nonsense, seeking to meddle in people's lives and curb personal freedom. So this dude thinks he should have the fucking personal freedom to take photos of people's skirts. What the fuck? What the nanny state nonsense? So protecting women is nanny state nonsense. Put personal freedoms. What's your fucking personal freedom? Female genital mutilation. Personal freedom to what? Butcher genitals. You're fucked up. You're fucked up, dude. Like, you should be ashamed. Who is voting for this crusty old fucker coming out with this nonsense, playing God with people's lives? But this is an example of what I'm talking about, when you've got knobheads who think like this, that are coming out with this rubbish. And they've got power. They've actually got the power to stop motions going forward for the protection of women, to have assaults against women made criminal, to mean that people are punished if they do bad things to women. It's playing God. It's playing God. And these same crusty old fuckers, think about it. 100 years ago in Parliament, I didn't look at when the first female MP was allowed to sit in the Houses of Parliament in the UK. I need to go and look that one up. I should have done that as well, shouldn't I? But fucking hell, 100 years ago, this crusty old fucker would have been the only fucker. It would have been a fucking room full of them crusty old fuckers, and media, and policing, and academia, and criminal justice. Are you seeing where I'm going with this? If only 100 years ago it was all these kinds of men with these kind of privileges that were sitting in the highest positions of power in all aspects of politics, law, policy, criminal justice. Are you saying that those ideas have not been ingrained, that the osmosis of that misogyny and privilege is not still being held within those institutions? Until it's been centuries of true equality of male and female representation, until we're not looking at Parliament and seeing a sea of white male faces, looking at academia and seeing a sea of white male faces, looking at policing, looking at criminal justice, looking at law, it's seas of white male faces that have the loudest voices. How do we expect these prejudices against women, and then particularly about sexual women? Because the women who are allowed into politics, they have to be squeaky clean. David Cameron could have fucked a pig's head, but if as a woman you'd been a sex worker and you tried to get into politics, no one would vote for you. You have to be the epitome of modesty and chastity and respectability. The progress we have made basically sets the narrative that your life only matters if you're a respectable woman. The Yorkshire Ripper documentary taught us that your life only matters if you're a respectable woman. The Independent newspaper article told us that your life only matters if you're a respectable woman. Adam Persky, Justice Robin Camp, Senior Counsel Elizabeth O'Connell, all telling us that you only matter, your victimhood is only legitimate if you're a respectable woman. 1973 to 2018, different eras, same messages. We still have a long way to go till we can have confidence that the media, the criminal justice system, the courts, the law, policy are truly representative and inclusive of all factions of women and marginalised people. So that's why these True Crime Tuesday videos have come about. We're talking about all of these issues. We're examining things beyond the superficial, beyond the perpetrator. We're looking beyond that vacuum. We're looking at the wider societal and cultural narratives and the impact, how crimes are policed and investigated, how the criminal justice system works. We're looking at those failures in investigation, the shortcomings on the part of law and policy. And also I really do want to empower people, write to your MPs, don't always take no for an answer. If you approach the police and they're not interested, Gina Martin shows that law isn't always correct, it's not always represented, and sometimes it really is worth taking it that step further and having the confidence and empowerment to do that, to understand that marginalised factions are not represented. And sometimes it's horrible, innit, because we shouldn't have to do the work for people who are supposed to be the experts and are paid to do that job. We shouldn't have to put in that emotional labour, but sometimes it's necessary. And don't feel excluded or intimidated from doing that. So I know I haven't talked about a case as such today. This has sort of been an introductory video, just touching on lots of different areas and talking about how this has come about. And I hopefully been really interested and informative and educational, examining misogyny within the media and within those criminal justice systems and the ripple effect of all those influences and impacts. So I hope this has been enjoyable. I hope it's been informative. I use my Jilly Beauty Proud palette today to produce this look. Yeah, I'm loving it. The pigments in this palette are amazing. It's really reasonably priced. I think this was £17 in the sale, less than £20, completely cruelty free. Yeah, super impressed. And I believe they donate towards LGBTQ charities as well with the Pride palette. So worth an investment. Absolutely love it. Love the pigments. I feel like an angry fire goddess. Like, so, you know, maybe that's what I am today. Maybe I'm an angry fire goddess, like igniting my flames of wrath against systematic misogyny and prejudice against marginalised people. You know, I'm lighting the embers, the smoke underneath people, underneath my audience, to fire them up, to be angry fire deities, whatever gender you are. No gender at all. Live your best life. Hope I have not just women watching this channel. I hope there's some male identifying people or non-binary people that love makeup too. Self-expression is amazing. Gender's a social construct. Wear your skirts, wear your makeup. You can't be upskirted no more. But yeah, hopefully I'm here entertaining, educating, maybe empowering. That's the goal, that's the aim. So next week I'm talking about the Sarah Payne murder. So obviously if you don't want to hear about offences against a child, I would recommend skipping next week. The focus is not going to be on the terrible crimes committed against poor Sarah, absolutely not. And it's also not on that sick bastard who committed them crimes. It's about the investigation, it's about the law and policy, and it's actually putting a spotlight on Sarah Payne, Sarah's mum, and the amazing work that she did within the criminal justice system. So it's a really meaty one, but it's going to be really interesting. So yeah, from now on, each week there will be a particular case, a couple of cases that I'm highlighting and focusing on. There'll be a little bit more focused, a bit less all over the place. But yeah, as I say, I've recorded this video 3 times to get it right, but I've said what I wanted to say. Maybe you'll watch, maybe you won't. Maybe people have fucked off and got bored of me by now, but this is really important to me. And even if only a few people watch, I feel like I'm spreading the good word. So please stay safe during these very strange COVID times, and please take care of yourself. Stay at home, wash your hands, try and self-care, try and be very, very kind to yourself. Look out for your friends and those around you. And I will see you again this Sunday for my next episode of Stripper Sunday, talking about Stringfellows in London. Thank you very much for your time and attention, and I will see you next Tuesday. Maybe I need to rethink that outro, because see you next Tuesday spells